What if I told you that the greatest athlete Hollywood ever produced, a 6'4" Marine who could leap over 3 horses from a standing start, who doubled for Errol Flynn, Gregory Peck, John Wayne, and Randolph Scott, would one day be shattered not by a missed stunt or a fall from a horse, but by a filthy river on the other side of the world? And what if I told you that his stepdaughter, a girl he helped steer toward acting, would grow up to win 2 Academy Awards, and then reveal a secret so devastating it would rewrite everything the world thought it knew about this man? This is the story of Jock Mahoney, and the truth is darker than any Western villain he ever played. Number 1. The kid who could do everything. Jock Joseph O'Mahony came into the world on February 7, 1919, in Chicago, Illinois. His father, Charles, worked on the railroad. His mother, Ruth, had French ancestry and claimed Cherokee blood. The family didn't stay in Chicago long. Jock later joked he was only there long enough for 3 diaper changes, and they settled in Davenport, Iowa, where the boy became something extraordinary. By the time he hit high school, Jock stood over 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. He wasn't just good at sports. He was good at every single one of them. Swimming, diving, basketball, football, baseball, tennis, gymnastics, track. His mother insisted he also learn piano and dancing, and he sang lead tenor in a school production of The Gondoliers. At age 9, he attended the Tom Mix Circus and met the cowboy star in person. The encounter planted something in him that would take root years later. His athletic gifts earned him a scholarship to the University of Iowa. But he refused to specialize in any single sport, which meant a professional career was off the table. He initially planned to study medicine. Then his parents divorced in 1938. The money dried up, and Jock Mahoney made a decision that would change Hollywood forever. He dropped out, loaded his car, and drove to Los Angeles with $5 in his pocket. But if you think a broke kid from Iowa was about to get a warm welcome from the movie business, what happened next will surprise you. Number 2. The Marine who learned to fight and fly. When Jock Mahoney arrived in Los Angeles in early 1940, he found work at the Los Angeles Athletic Club, training alongside serious competitors and preparing for the 1944 Olympics in swimming and diving. But the world had other plans. World War II was coming, and Mahoney enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He became a fighter pilot and flight instructor, a man trusted to teach other Marines how to take off from and land on aircraft carriers. The Marines also taught him hand-to-hand combat and judo, skills that would define his career in ways nobody could have predicted. He sailed through basic training so fast that he was immediately made an assistant instructor. By 1945, he was flying off aircraft carriers, but the war was winding down, and he never saw combat. That fact bothered him, but the skills he walked away with, the discipline, the fearlessness, the judo, the sheer physical confidence of a man trained to fight in the air and on the ground, would make him something the movie industry had never quite seen before. When the war ended, Mahoney headed back to Los Angeles. He dabbled in surplus warplane trading and horse breeding. Neither worked out, but through a connection at Paramount, he got a chance to stand in for cowboy actor Russell Hayden, and suddenly, the movie business noticed him. So how does a broke ex-Marine go from standing in the background to becoming the most feared stuntman in Hollywood? The answer involves a masked cowboy, a glass of water, and 3 horses standing side by side. Number 3. The stuntman nobody could touch. Columbia Pictures needed a stunt double for their biggest B-Western star, Charles Starrett, who played a masked hero called the Durango Kid. The role demanded brutal fights, impossible horse stunts, and death-defying leaps. They offered the job to Mahoney at $250 a week. He took it. And for the next 5 years, from 1946 to 1951, across nearly 50 films, Jock Mahoney became the Durango Kid's shadow. Starrett himself was stunned. He told people that Mahoney moved like a cat. He joked that he was only around to do Jock's dialogue. What Mahoney could do with his body defied explanation. He could leap over a 15-hand horse from a standing position. He could mount a horse at full gallop without using his hands. Actress Peggy Stewart watched him ride with a glass of water balanced on his head, at a canter, over rough ground, without spilling a single drop. He once jumped between two rooftops more than 20 feet apart, a distance that approached the Olympic long jump record of that era. Columbia recycled the footage because they knew they'd never capture anything quite like it again. He doubled Randolph Scott in Coroner Creek, choreographing a fight so realistic that Scott, who spent the breaks reading the Wall Street Journal, would look up afterward and ask with complete sincerity how he'd done. He doubled Gregory Peck in Yellow Sky, and when Peck broke his ankle, Mahoney quietly took over many of his scenes. He was slated to double John Wayne, but Wayne sent him home for being too pretty. His waist was too slim to match the Duke's frame. The two remained lifelong friends anyway. By 1950, Mahoney was earning roughly $30,000 a year. His peers considered him the greatest stuntman in the business. But he wanted more. He didn't just want to be the man behind the mask. He wanted to be the man standing directly in front of it. And before that happened, he would pull off a single stunt so legendary that it would echo through Hollywood for decades. Number 4. The leap that only one man would take. The year was 1948. Director Vincent Sherman was filming Adventures of Don Juan and needed someone to leap from the 17th step of a grand staircase to the hard floor below, doubling for Errol Flynn in a swashbuckling sword fight. The stunt coordinator told Sherman there was only one man in Hollywood who could possibly do it: Jock Mahoney. Mahoney walked onto the set, looked at the staircase, and demanded $1,000 for a single jump. The studio paid it. In an era when stuntmen earned a few $100s a week, that fee was almost unheard of. Sherman later said he kicked himself for not filming it in slow motion, because the leap was so spectacular that audiences would have gasped seeing every second of it. When Errol Flynn saw what Mahoney had done, he was so impressed that he offered the stuntman his own personal dressing room. Flynn had worked with hundreds of stuntmen. He'd never made that gesture before. That single leap, from the 17th step, for $1,000, with no net, no wires, and no second take, became the stunt every young stuntman measured himself against for the next 30 years. But Mahoney didn't want to be remembered for one jump. He wanted his own show, his own horse, his own name above the title. And in 1951, a cowboy legend named Gene Autry gave him that. Number 5. The Range Rider Who Conquered America. Gene Autry was building a television empire through his Flying A Productions, and he needed a star for a new Western series. He handed Mahoney the lead in The Range Rider, a syndicated half-hour Western about a nameless buckskin-clad hero who rode a horse named Rawhide alongside his young sidekick Dick West, played by 24-year-old Dick Jones, the former voice of Pinocchio. The show was unlike anything on television. Mahoney and Jones did every single one of their own stunts. They never simply climbed onto their horses. They always mounted at a dead run with a flying leap. Mahoney worked judo throws and acrobatic fights into every episode, performing feats that left the crew shaking their heads. The Range Rider ran for 78 episodes across 3 seasons and was a massive hit. Mahoney's face appeared on the cover of TV Guide. There were Range Rider coloring books, cap pistols, jigsaw puzzles, and Dell comic books. The Chicago Tribune declared that Mahoney had everything John Wayne, Gary Cooper, and Joel McCrea had, and that he was roughly 20 years younger. Dick Jones adored his co-star, later saying there would never be anyone else like him, one of a kind in his field, and one of the nicest men he'd ever known. It was during The Range Rider that Mahoney married actress Margaret Field in 1952. Margaret had 2 children from a previous marriage, a boy named Richard and a little girl named Sally. Jock Mahoney became their stepfather. That little girl would grow up to become Sally Field, one of the most acclaimed actresses in American history. But we'll come back to Sally Field, because what happened between her and her stepfather is a story that demands its own chapter. So what could possibly go wrong for America's favorite cowboy? The answer involves a network, a betrayal, and a bottle. Number 6. The show they stole from him. After The Range Rider ended, Mahoney moved into feature films at Universal. The studio offered him a $70,000 a year contract to star in a new series called Cimarron City. Most actors would have jumped at the money. Mahoney turned it down. He had a better deal, or so he thought. In 1958, CBS launched Yancey Derringer, starring Mahoney as a suave ex-Confederate gambler and covert troubleshooter in Reconstruction-era New Orleans. Mahoney owned a one-quarter interest in the production. The show debuted October 2, 1958, ran for 34 episodes, and earned solid ratings. Then, CBS made its move. According to Mahoney, the network demanded to buy a controlling interest in the show. When he and his partners refused, CBS canceled it after just one season. Mahoney said he never saw a nickel of his percentage deal. The show that was supposed to make him wealthy left him with... The cancellation broke something in him. He fell into debt. He sold his mansion. He later described himself during this period as an instant alcoholic. A man who went from America's cowboy to a man drowning at the bottom of a bottle in what felt like overnight. He was 40 years old, broke, and fighting a drinking problem. Most careers would have ended right there. But Jock Mahoney still had one impossible trick left, and it would require him to strip down to a loincloth and convince the world that a 43-year-old man could be the king of the apes. Number 7. The oldest Tarzan in history. Mahoney had auditioned to play Tarzan once before, back in 1948, when the studio was looking to replace Johnny Weissmuller. He lost the role to Lex Barker and spent 12 years watching other men swing from the vines. Then fate stepped in through the back door. In 1960, producer Cy Weintraub cast Mahoney as the villain in Tarzan the Magnificent, opposite Gordon Scott. Mahoney threw himself into the role with such physical intensity that Weintraub made a decision that stunned the industry. He fired Gordon Scott and hired the villain to become the next Tarzan. Weintraub wanted a new kind of ape man. Not a grunting bodybuilder, but an articulate, mature Tarzan closer to the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. A man who could fight and think at the same time. Mahoney fit the vision perfectly. Tarzan Goes to India began filming on February 12, 1962, on location in Mysore, India. Mahoney was 43 years old, making him the oldest actor ever to take on the role, surpassing even Weissmuller. He did every one of his own stunts. The film grossed approximately $1.1 million in North America. Weintraub immediately greenlit a sequel. Tarzan's 3 Challenges would film in Thailand in 1963, with Woody Strode cast as the villain Khan. Mahoney arrived on set at 220 pounds of sculpted muscle, looking like a man half his age. Nobody on that set could have known that the jungles of Thailand were about to destroy him. And the way it happened was entirely his own fault. Number 8. The river that broke the Unbreakable Man. During filming in Thailand, the crew needed a shot of Tarzan swimming across a river. Woody Strode took one look at the water and warned Mahoney not to go in. The river was one of the most polluted waterways in Thailand, visibly filthy, choked with sewage and industrial runoff. Any sensible person would have used a double or filmed the scene somewhere else. Mahoney was not a sensible person. He was Jock Mahoney. He'd jumped from the 17th step. He'd leaped over 3 horses. He'd never backed down from a physical challenge in his life, so he stripped down and swam across. Within days, he was violently ill. He contracted amoebic dysentery first. Then dengue fever hit. Then pneumonia set in on top of both. His weight began to plummet. The man who had arrived in Thailand at 220 pounds began wasting away in front of the crew's eyes. Director Robert Day rearranged the shooting schedule to hide the weight loss from scene to scene. In some takes, Mahoney looked like Tarzan. In others, filmed just days later, he looked like a skeleton wearing Tarzan's loincloth. Mahoney refused to quit. He completed every single scene, dragging himself to set day after day, with dengue fever burning through his body. By the time filming wrapped, he weighed approximately 175 pounds, a loss of roughly 45 pounds in a matter of weeks. He nearly died, multiple times. It took him a year and a half to regain his health. Some accounts say closer to 2 years. The damage was permanent. He never fully recovered his old stamina, his old strength, his old invincibility. At 44, Jock Mahoney officially became the oldest actor ever to play Tarzan, a record that still stands today. But the record came at a price that would follow him for the rest of his life. Weintraub wanted a younger man for the planned television series, and Mahoney's contract was dissolved. The king of the jungle was dethroned, and the career that had once seemed unstoppable began a long, painful slide. So what happens when a man built entirely on physical supremacy loses the one thing that made him extraordinary? Number 9. The stroke, the wheelchair, and the final stunt. After Thailand, Jock Mahoney was a diminished man. He took low-budget action films in the Philippines for roughly $5,000 a week. He accepted bit parts in bigger films. He made 3 guest appearances on the Ron Ely Tarzan series, watching a younger man play the role that had nearly killed him. Then, on a soundstage in 1973, everything collapsed. Mahoney was 54 years old, filming an episode of Kung Fu with David Carradine. The studio had quietly assigned a younger stuntman to double him, but Mahoney insisted on doing his own work. He always had. The director called action. Mahoney stepped into the scene, and then he dropped. A massive stroke hit him right there on the set. The right side of his body went paralyzed. His speech was severely impaired. The man who'd once leaped over 3 horses from a standing start couldn't lift his right arm. Months of rehabilitation followed. Mahoney fought his way back with the same stubborn intensity that had driven him into that Thai river. He regained some movement. His speech improved. But he periodically needed a wheelchair for the rest of his life. His old friend Burt Reynolds, who credited Mahoney with a pep talk that had once kept Reynolds from quitting acting entirely, gave Mahoney a role in his 1978 film, The End. In one final act of defiance, Mahoney performed a stunt, going off a bridge in a wheelchair. The character of aging stuntman Jocko Doyle in Reynolds' film Hooper was modeled directly on Mahoney. He received the Golden Boot Award in 1986 for his contributions to the Western genre. He spent his final years in Poulsbo, Washington, far from Hollywood, beloved on the Western convention circuit, where fans lined up to shake the hand that had once gripped a vine over a jungle canopy. On December 12, 1989, Mahoney was involved in a car accident near Bremerton, Washington. 2 days later, on December 14th, a second stroke took him. He was 70 years old. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. The Associated Press called him perhaps Hollywood's most famous stuntman-turned-actor. The man who could do everything was gone. But the story doesn't end there. Because decades after his death, his stepdaughter stepped forward with a truth that no one in the cowboy world wanted to hear. Number 10. The Secret. His stepdaughter carried for decades. In 2018, Sally Field published her memoir, In Pieces. By then, she had won 2 Academy Awards, 3 Emmy Awards, and the respect of an entire industry. She was 72 years old, and she was finally ready to tell the truth about her stepfather. In the book, Field wrote that Jock Mahoney, the man she called Jocko, had sexually abused her throughout her childhood, beginning when she was very young and continuing until she was 14 years old. She described being sent to his bedroom as a child, ostensibly to walk on his back. She described incidents that escalated over the years. She described the paralyzing confusion of a child who simultaneously feared and admired the most physically powerful person in her world. What made her account so devastating was its complexity. Field did not portray Mahoney as a simple monster. She wrote that it would have been so much easier if she had only felt one thing about him, if he had been nothing but cruel and frightening. But he wasn't. She described him as magical at times, a charismatic figure who could captivate an entire family. And she described him as menacing at other times, a man whose moods could shift without warning. Field's own mother, Margaret, confirmed Mahoney's volatile nature, a man who could be sweet and warm one moment, then mean and impossible to please the next. Field did not tell her mother about the abuse until decades later, after filming Lincoln in 2012. There is a painful irony in the timeline. It was Mahoney who steered young Sally toward acting in the first place. directing her to a Columbia workshop in 1964 that led to her breakout role in Gidget. The man who violated her childhood also opened the door to the career that would make her one of the most celebrated performers of her generation. Mahoney died in 1989. He never responded to the allegations because they were not made public until 29 years after his death. His legacy now sits permanently split between the beloved cowboy, the extraordinary athlete, the man his friends described as one of the nicest they'd ever known, and the predator his stepdaughter described in unflinching, published detail. Remember that paradox from the beginning? The greatest athlete Hollywood ever produced, the man who could leap from the 17th step without a net, the Marine who never backed down. That same man carried a darkness that no stunt could outrun, no river could wash away, and no amount of applause could erase. Jock Mahoney could do everything. He could leap over horses, fly fighter planes, swing through jungles, and survive a disease that should have jungles killed him. But he could not outrun the truth. And in the end, the truth caught up. Delivered not by a stunt coordinator or a studio executive, but by a two-time Oscar winner who'd spent her entire life finding the courage to speak. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join us here. Because every legend has a story the history books left out, and we're just getting started. Thank you for watching the complete video. Did you know? Americans over 60 lost $7.7 billion to scams last year. That's according to the FBI. In 2020, that number was just 600 million. These aren't careless people. These are retired teachers, veterans, business owners, losing an average of $83,000 each. Now ask yourself this. Could you spot a phone call that uses your grandson's cloned voice, begging for help? Would you recognize a fake email from your bank that looks exactly like the real thing? Do you know what to do in the first 60 minutes after your personal information is stolen? If you hesitated on any of those, you're not alone. And that's exactly why we started The Lookout, a newsletter with one email per week. No spam, no politics. Just the latest scams explained, how they work, and exactly how to protect yourself and the people you love. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. It costs nothing. It takes 2 minutes to read, and it might save you everything.